Hello. Oh, yep.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to call this special school board meeting of September 8th, 2020 to order. The time is 5:05 p.m. The purpose of today's meeting is to hold a public hearing to consider the adoption of the 2020-2021 final millage rates and the 2020-2021 final budget. At this time, we request that cellular phones be turned off or put into the silent mode. I would like to take this opportunity to remind the members of the public of the district's mission, which is to ensure that each student achieves his or her highest personal potential, and of the district's vision to be a world-class school system. Today's agenda includes presentation on the percent of increase over the rollback rate, proposed millages, budget overview, proposed final budget, a public hearing on the final budget, adoption of the required local effort millage, of the basic discretionary millage, capital outlay millage, a resolution determining revenues and millages, and the fiscal year 21 final budget and related resolution adopting the final budget. Also on the agenda are comments from board members, superintendent, and board attorney. Board members, is there a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Ms. Vaughn? Go ahead.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Moved by Ms. Vaughn and seconded by Ms. Gittens. Thank you. Please record your vote.
Oh, shoot.
Okay, the motion carries 7-0. I will now turn the meeting over to Dr. Atkins, Superintendent, Dr. Desamore, Chief Financial Officer, and Mrs. Letcher, Director of Budget. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is with great pleasure that we are finally here to adopt the final budget for the 2020-2021 school year. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Desamores and her team to take us through the presentation of this year's budget. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Atkins. Members of the board, this hearing is the second of 2 public hearings required under Florida statutes to provide the public an opportunity to give input into the proposed millage levy and the budget for this fiscal year. The superintendent submitted his proposed tentative budget to the board on July 24. The tentative hearing was advertised in the news press on Saturday, July 25. The first public hearing was held on July 28 to discuss and adopt the tentative millage rates and the tentative budget. On Thursday, September 3rd, you received information on the final budget for fiscal year 2020-2021. The second and final budget public hearing being held today was noticed through a direct mailing from the property appraiser's office. That mail document is known as the TRIM, or the Truth in Millage Notice, and was sent as required by law. So now I will turn it over to Mrs. Letcher to provide further detail on the budget.
Good afternoon. So as outlined by TRIM requirements, the first thing we have to discuss is the rollback rate, which is basically the millage when applied to the current year's taxes, net of adjustment for new growth, would produce the same dollars as we received in the previous year. The rollback rate this year was calculated to be 5.9168 mils. We're actually levying 6.58 mils, which is an increase of 2.39% over the rollback rate. The proposed millage rate this year of the I'm sorry, excuse me. The required local effort part of that is 1.52% of that increase, which is the part that the legislature requires that you levy in order to participate in the Florida Education Finance Program. So I want to show you some history of our millage rates and our rollback rates. As you can see, in the current year, our tax roll is $96,587,103,127, which is a $5.7 million increase over last year's tax roll, which is a 6.32% increase. The required local effort mills this year is 3.810. Last year, it was 3.8990, which is a decrease of 0.089. Our discretionary mills is the same at 0.748, and our capital mill is the same as 1.5. We will generate $25.6 million more than last year due to the increased tax roll. However, due to the way that the Florida Education Finance Program works, when the tax roll increases, the required local effort really doesn't generate any additional dollars for Lee County. They just reduce the state portion to us so that we have the same total potential that we would have based on the being equal across the whole state of Florida. We will see the increase in the discretionary mills and the capital mills. This is a comparison of our millage rate, and as you can see, our millage rate decreases. It's been decreasing over the years, and the next slide shows you that as our millage rate decreases, the tax roll actually increases. So that is a turn that happens all the time. As the tax roll goes up, the millage rate comes down.
Wonderful. And as you can see on this slide, and Kelly mentioned, the tax value or the taxable value, tax roll this year at about $96.6 billion, which represents about a 6.3% increase from where it was the previous year. Now, though the tax rate, the tax rates have decreased about 1.5%, so the millages or the tax rate is a decrease of about 1.5%. The larger increase in the tax roll indicates that most property owners will see a slight increase in their property taxes. So the next slide just kind of gives an overview of what that may look like for an average person out there. So we took some values and we increased those values from last year at about 6.32%, which, as we said, was the percentage increase of the tax roll or the taxable value for this year. So you see, for those individuals who last year had a taxable value or had a home or residential site worth between $100,000 and $200,000, that difference then in property taxes for this year would amount to somewhere between $29 and a little under $60 for the year. And that is, of course, assuming a homestead rate on that, I do believe. And then you have a 3% increase, which would be in effect for those who are under the Save Our Homes Amendment. And again, for that $100,000 to $200,000 range, you're looking at, on average, that increase of a little under $11 to a little over $20. And so that's just a small illustration of what some of the numbers would look like in practical terms when we're talking about what these millage rates and how they interact with the tax roll itself. Okay, so here you have the listing of the millages, as Kelly had mentioned before, and how much each one raises within the budget this year. There are 3 different millages. The required local effort and the basic discretionary are for the general fund, and then the capital outlay is for the capital fund. That required local effort millage rate is set by the legislators, and the others do have the maximums set in statute as well. So you see here in that illustration, again, that total millage amount of 6.058 with the proposed amount to be raised from those millages across the board of $561,719,687.
So tonight, we're proposing that you adopt the budget, which is at $1,915,025,846. That's made up of the different parts of the budget. The general fund is at $964,824,078. Our debt service at $104,532,235. Capital at $543,291,246. Our special grants, or federal grants, are at $85,404,584. Our special revenue food service part is at $71,679,802. And our internal service fund is at $145,293,901 to total the $1.9 billion. So basically, you all have been through this, so you know what all the different parts of the budget are and what they stand for, but wanted to go through this so that the public had an understanding of the different parts of the budget and what each of the parts of the budget did. So the general fund takes up the basic part of the education of our students and our operating expenses of the district. The major portion of funding for the general fund is the Florida Education Finance Program, or the FEFP it's called. Our debt service pays all of our debt. It pays for any loans and things that we get, and the funding for that comes from a transfer from our capital dollars. Our capital dollars are used to build schools, to buy equipment for our schools and departments, and to provide maintenance services on our schools. And these funds are basically generated through the capital outlay millage, the 1.5 mils. We also have sales tax dollars now. Thank you to the public for that. And impact fees are the three largest parts of the capital budget. Our food service budget, of course, supports the breakfast and lunch program for all of our students, and that is a federal reimbursement program. So we get reimbursed as the students do the breakfast and the lunch. We get reimbursed for that. And then the special revenue are federal dollars that are given to us for specific purposes. And then internal service funds, that covers all of our insurance costs, our health insurance for our employees, our self-insurance for our workers' comp, and all of our other insurances. And those dollars come from a transfer from the other funds in order to cover that. As I was saying, the general fund is our biggest fund, of course. It's the major source of revenue for our daily operations. It's budgeted at $964.8 million. It is 50% of our total budget. It supports over 96,000 students, and this year's targeted initiatives were the teacher salary increases from the state, the reading initiatives at the elementary level. We continue with the additional 30 minutes at select elementary schools. We have a standardized middle school schedule, and we have additional ESOL supports. The Florida Education Finance Program, as I said, was the biggest part of that funding piece. It totals $765.5 million of the general fund. That is a $30.6 million increase from last year. It's a 2.3% increase in per pupil funding, but just wanted to let you know that 1% of that increase is actually tied up in that new teacher salary allocation. Approximately $4.5 million of that will go to our private school scholarship programs, which is the McKay and the FES, the Family Empowerment Program. We have a $7,969 per FTE, which is an increase of $181 from last year's amount. Our base student allocation is $4,319.49, which is an increase of $40 from last year's $4,279.49. And of the FEFP, it is 45% state funded, 55% funded through our taxes.
So this graph shows the breakdown of where our operating revenues come from. So in the general fund, how much of that comes from where? So you see the largest slice of the pie, or that is that 55.39% comes from local sources. So that is mainly that required local effort effort millage and the basic discretionary millage that we referred to a little bit earlier, that is where the bulk of our revenues from in the general fund come from, are those local sources, which is property taxes for the most part. And then you have the other larger piece of the pie, 44% of that coming from state revenue, which is that other part of the FEFP, or that how the state funds education for schools, or funding for schools and Florida Education Finance Program. 44% of that revenue really comes from the state, which is the other part of that big funding formula. So together, those two pieces between state and local form the total amount that we're getting through the FEFP, with the local portion being the largest portion. And then in the general fund, just a very small slice of that being federal sources in the general fund. Now, when you go to the special grants or revenues fund, that is where you'll get the larger portion of where federal dollars come from. But in the general fund, a very, very small amount from federal sources. And then flipping to the next slide, as you would expect, you see the largest portion of the expenditures as budgeted in the general fund, 73% of them going to instruction and direct school expenses, with the other percentages laid out as you see here in the pie. But you would expect, of course, for schools that the largest portion of the budget would be directed towards instruction or direct school expenses, which is what you see here on the pie. Now, wanting to, I'm trying to lean into the mic here so you can hear me. Please let me know if you don't. So just wanting to break down into, on that pie, we had a slice for contingency and reserve. So when we go in to kind of do a little examination into that, of course, those are the dollars that protects the district's financial position in the case of unexpected circumstances and things that may happen during the year. So of that, contingency represents 3% of new revenue. So at about $24 million you will see set aside specifically in the budget book as part of that reserve. That is really the minimum 3% that the state says we must set aside lest we be monitored. And you'll see that related to, or referred to as contingency within that reserve piece of the pie. And then we also have FTE shortfall set aside of $3 million, or that is, remember, within our Florida Education Finance Program, we're funded on the number of students that walk through the door and that we serve. If we end up serving less than what the state anticipates we will, then there could be occasion for them to come back and adjust those funds. So we hold back some additional dollars in that circumstance as well. Now, at the tentative budget time, our reserves that we had set aside, we also talked about an additional amount that we had set aside that was basically some dollars at about $15 million that were going to help us cover expenses related to COVID and things that may come up during this ever so different school year than what we've had before. So we still have those dollars set aside in the budget under specific expenditure categories that really relate to things like custodial services. So if we need to hire some additional temporary custodians to make sure that we can keep up with the necessary cleaning, if some custodians call out, or if we need additional help. You all approved a contract for us to do so, I think, at the last board meeting, and so we have amounts set aside to do that. Response fogging, we've also set aside some amounts for that. And then supplies for all of our schools and departments, which is the PPE that we've talked about quite a little bit. So supplies like masks and face shields, gowns, hand sanitizer, dispensers across our locations for that hand sanitizer, disinfectant spray, counter shields, desk shields, and touchless water fountains. Those are all the types of things that we have set up budgets and have money set aside to cover. So within the current budget that we are reviewing with you and that you will approve today has about $15 million worth of COVID-related expenses set aside within the general fund conservatively, right? In order to make sure that we can cover all of our unexpected or cover all of our circumstances that may arise during the year. And then we discussed, I believe at our last board briefing, that we'll be talking with you monthly about, so what are those actuals coming to look like? So we will continue to do that, because that dollar amount that we have budgeted at this point is a conservative dollar amount. We tried to plan for what could be all of our students here all year long, and we know that that's kind of not where we are right now. So we'll be able to monitor that, those outcomes during the year, and be able to adjust accordingly and report to you on where we are in actuality. Knowing that we might have to do some restructuring or reworking of our budget as well, based on FEMA information that we received. And Ms. Morgan asked a little earlier, so is FEMA reimbursing or not? And at this point, it does appear to us that the answer would be no, but we will continue to work through the process and come to get a definite conclusion on that from the powers that be at the state level and at the FEMA level. So we will work both ends. We will continue to pursue the process and get an official recognition of our pursuit of the process and an official answer, and then at the same time continue and amend and work the budget even after this point to make sure that we're utilizing our funding sources to the best of our ability.
So our food service fund is currently budgeted at $71.7 million, and as I said before, it includes breakfast and lunch for every child at no additional cost to the parents. We are still under the Community Eligibility Program, or the CEP program, so all of our schools and our students in those schools are receiving a free breakfast and lunch. As I told you before, the funds here are received from a federal reimbursement, and right now we are feeding all of our face-to-face and our Lee Home Connect students. Special revenue is the federal grants that come in. We have the biggest federal grants that we have are Title I, IDEA, and then we have some other federal grants, our Title II, Title IV, Title III, they come in. Currently it's budgeted at $85.4 million. This specific fund you'll see continue to grow as we receive the notifications of award for these grants. Our grant, the funding will increase and come to you on a monthly basis, showing you those increases. The special revenue also includes the CARES Act funds. Those are the funds that we have received from the federal government to help with getting school back up and running and helping the students with the lost part of education that they had. We've discussed this before. I just want to go over it again so that everybody's aware of the different parts of the CARES Act that we get. The first one that we received was the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or the GEERS. That one was at $2 million. That one was basically to provide summer instruction for students and extended learning opportunities for students. Since, I think within the last week or two, we've also been notified that we're going to receive another $800,000 that falls under the GEERS Act, specifically for PPE items. So we're going to be rearranging some things and paying for the PPE items out of that grant. We have the Building K-12, the CTE infrastructure of $279,000, and that's basically to help us get the enrollment up for those high demand CTE programs. The rapid credentialing was one that came in for post-secondary at $367,000. That was to help with the enrollment of our students into our post-secondary programs in order to get those students back into the programs. The Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, or the HERF, was at $1 million. This one is that the money goes directly to the students to help them with some financial aid grants. Then we had some funding come in under the Office of Head Start for our Head Start, Early Head Start programs. The biggest of the ones that we received was the ESSER, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, at $21 million. And this one we had set up, and we have some things that we were funding from that. We are going to be re-looking at this and reworking this, depending on what we find out from FEMA. So if FEMA comes back with some, the definite no's, then we'll be reworking this in order to work some of that PPE stuff into this grant so that we can save some of our general fund dollars as well. I think this one's yours.
Yeah, our capital funds currently budgeted at $543.3 million, and our local property taxes and sales tax are really the major sources of funding within this particular budgeted fund. And our 5-year plan, which is included within the budget document and all the information that you received, includes the building of 2 new elementary schools, 2 new middle schools, a new high school, a K-8, and 2 rebuilds within our 5-year plan. So quite a busy capital plan, and of course, that's just the new buildings. That does not include, all of the maintenance that will be going on, as well as the technology, which is all detailed within the actual full 5-year capital plan that is within your information. And then debt service is an offshoot of the capital fund, or that is transfer of dollars from the capital fund goes into the debt service fund in order to pay the mortgage of the district each year. So we have that budgeted at $104.5 million. Now you'll notice over the next several years, you'll see that debt service fund going up, and that is because for all of those new buildings that we're having, we have dedicated, for the most part, our sales tax funds in order to pay that, but we'll have COPS that has been taken out for each of those. So we'll have debt service payments for each of those new buildings over the life of the sales tax referendum. So they will be, so you'll see this amount in debt service continue to go up over the next several years as you see that coming to fruition. Now, that statutory debt service capacity really only has to deal with those debt service payments that are being paid from our 1.5 millage fund, so it does not include that sales tax amount in there. So as far as the statutory debt service capacity, we're at 32.4%. The recommended capacity, or that is where you all as a board have typically stood and said, hey, we want you to stay at 50% of the millage funds that we get in for capital, we are at 48.6% of that capacity. So good numbers as we move forward. As we talked earlier, we have where COVID is affecting us in the budget. I know we had a little bit of conversation about this at our last briefing meeting, and whereas you cannot necessarily see specifically in the budget book that you have where those things are necessarily noted, we try to give you some information today as to, in the general fund, the types of things that we have budgeted and the amounts for COVID that we have budgeted within the general fund. In capital, it is really student technology. So some of the additional Chromebooks that we've had to procure, or that we might need to procure still upcoming for this year, that'll be taken care of within the capital funds. And then hotspots are budgeted currently as part of the CARES Act. So if we need some additional funds in order to provide internet access for our students or staff who are continuing to educate from home, then that is where those funds will come from. And then as far as food service, we had budgeted within the food service funds that extra revenue, or the extra expenditures that we needed for mobile feeding, because that went on for a long time and at extra expense with additional people that we needed to support that program for quite some time during the summer, which was within this fiscal year. Now, right now, we're kind of back in, kind of regular mode or operations in terms of just feeding at schools. And then, of course, we've got our mobile program that still goes for Lee Home Connect students, and now newly for virtual students as well. But it is still within the school day with existing staff that we have. if there comes a time where for whatever reason, because of the circumstances we are under, we have to do something different with that or expand that as well, then of course those additional expenditures will be borne by the food service fund.
So with that, we would like to present this budget and let you know that it supports over 119 schools, over 96,000 students. It's supporting the initiatives of the state as well as the district's vision and mission, and it is centered on student and staff safety, student achievement, and Envision 2030. And with that, we would like to present this to you to make sure that each student reaches his or her highest personal potential.
Thank you, Ms. Letcher and Dr. Desamore. Dr. Atkins, at this time, I would ask you to present your recommendations for this evening's public hearing items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me start out. The first recommendation is to recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2020-2021 final proposed required local effort millage of 3.810 mils, with the proposed amount to be raised of $353,276,990. The RLE millage includes basic RLE of 3.805 and a prior period adjustment millage of 0.005. Next recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2020-2021 final proposed basic discretionary millage of 0.748 mils, with the proposed amount to be raised of $69,357,268. Next recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2020-2021 final proposed capital outlay millage of 1.500, with a proposed amount to be raised of $139,085,429. The total millage will equal 6.058 mils, with a total amount to be raised of $561,719,687. The total millage rate to be levied is more than the rollback rate. It is an increase in the rollback rate of 2.39%. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the final millage rates for fiscal year 2020-2021. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the final budget and related resolution adopting to the final budget for the 2020-2021 school year as follows. General operating, $964,824,078. Special revenue budget of $157,084,386. Debt service budget of $104,532,235. Capital outlay budget of $543,291,246. Internal service budget of $145,293,901 for a total final budget of $1,915,025,846.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. We will now recess this special school board meeting and open the public hearing to consider the adoption of the final millage rates and final budget for 2020-21. At this time, the public will be invited to speak on these matters only. The time allowed for comment is 3 minutes per speaker. Is there anyone in the right section, anyone in the audience who wishes to address the board? And Ms. Dupree-Bruno, do you have any persons in attendance in the boardroom who wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have one speaker, Mr. Lou Navarro. Two speakers, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Navarro, please approach the microphone.
Good evening. Lou Navarro, former teacher, long-term Lee County resident. I have a few questions on the budget. The 1.5 capital outlay, that's the maximum we can tax the public, right, for capital outlay? Is that correct? Then what are we doing with the sales tax? Are we paying off the debt service? I did have those two concerns. I see the state's been generous again with their money. That's a joke. There's more people here for the Gateway High School renaming than there are for people for almost a $2 billion budget. Oh well, shows you where your priorities are. But I would like to know that. And how much of that sales tax is going to charter schools? And PICO, how much is PICO, how much are we getting from the state for PICO? Or did they cut it all out? I know that's in here on one of the pages that I brought in, but only have 3 minutes. You ought to give us a little more time for a budget hearing, you know what I mean? I can see the regular meeting. But I'd like to know the answers to those questions. And then you've got you said you had a 3% carryover, you know, your contingency. But on the final budget here, it says $284,990,616 brought over. And you brought over quite a bit from last year, which I've done the budgets when I used to be with Talc and all, and we always have money that we bring over. I'm not so sure that we shouldn't spend some of that money too. But I'm really concerned about, so what are we doing with this sales tax here? What's it paying? Debt service? Capital outlay, 1.5, that must be the local effort. And where's the PICO funds, if any? Those are my questions. Can anybody answer those? Or want to answer them? No? Well.
I assume we want to finish with public comment and then go back to answer
Okay,
questions.
and my comment is that I just thought that the balance transfer, it says here on the other sheet, $964,824,078 carryover. That seemed to me more than 3%. You must be meaning 3% of the operating budget then. So, you know, it looks like there's money around, and that's why the board had money a couple of years ago to get the sales tax promoted and all that. I feel like old bodies,
Right.
you know, they got cigarette and beer money, pardon the expression, you know, so I'd like an account of that though. Other than that,
Thank you, Mr. Navarro. Your time's up.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Madam Chair, there is not another speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought he said two. Okay. Mr. Navarro, someone from staff will contact you and provide you with some answers to your questions. Thank you for being there.
Speak to it now.
Can we do it now?
At this time, I will now close.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I just want to I can speak to some of those things now if you'd like for me to. I was just trying to.
Then that would be great. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, Mr. Navarro, listen up.
So there are a few questions in here, so I hope I get them in their entirety. If I don't, you can redirect me to some that I may not have answered. So the question was the 1.5 capital mill, is that the maximum that is allowed by law? And the answer to that is yes, it is. And so the question was, well, what are we doing with the sales tax? Well, both of those things, both, of course, the capital millage and the sales tax are both encompassed within the capital fund. Part of the reason why we went for the sales tax was because even with the capital outlay millage that was coming in, it was not sufficient to keep up with the building needs, or that is the new seats that we needed, along with the maintenance that we needed at all of our, 100 and some existing facilities, and technology needs for all of our students. So as far as what's happening with those sales tax funds, we do have on our website a dashboard that outlines where all the sales taxes have gone, both by function, or that is like major categories of where that's been expended, and also individually by location. So if you're interested in an individual location, how much sales tax has been expended at that location. All of that information is on the website, but generally, what's happening with the sales tax is that it is being used to fund new student stations, or that is our new buildings that are going up at this point. It is being used to fund some student technology that's at each of our locations, and also it is being used to fund maintenance, various types of maintenances, but mostly roofing and HVAC at different locations as well. And the question was, do charter schools get a piece of that sales tax? And the answer to that is no. At this point in time, they do not. And then, have we received PICO? We did not receive, that is the traditional public schools, did not receive a PICO allocation either in last year or this year. All of the PICO allocation went directly to charter schools in the previous year and also in this fiscal year as well. And then I think there was some reference to beer money, and I didn't necessarily understand that, so I'm not sure that I can answer that question, but there is not a revenue source that we have that comes strictly from that. So
Thank you.
those are the answers to the questions, and if I missed any, please let me know.
Thank you, Dr. Desamore. Okay, Mr. Navarre? Okay, great. Thank you.
It's strictly prohibited within the board policies. Okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you, Dr. Desamore, once again, and I will now close this public hearing and reconvene the special school board meeting of September 8th, 2020. The board will now consider each of the superintendent's recommendations. Dr. Atkins, please state your recommendations individually, allowing the board the opportunity to vote before moving on to the next one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first recommendation is recommended the Lee County School Board adopt the 2020-21 final proposed required local effort millage of 3.810 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $353,276,990. The RLE millage includes basic RLE of 3.805 and a prior period adjustment millage of 0.005.
Thank you. Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve? Mrs. Morgan?
I move that we adopt the superintendent's recommendation to adopt the 2021 final proposed required local effort millage of 3.81 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $353,276,990.
And is there a second? Ms. Jordan. Okay. Moved by Mrs. Morgan and seconded by Ms. Jordan. Any discussion? Ms. Gittens.
Okay, just to be clear then, on this one, the increase in the millage is the .005, correct?
No, actually for this one, there is not, if you could pull up the slide that compares the millages, Kelly. For the required local effort, this was not an increase in the previous rate. It was actually a decrease in the previous rate by about 0.089. So, but that total amount, that 3.810, is broken out into two different pieces. A recovery of last year's millage by 0.005, and then the base required local effort at 3.805.
Okay, so am I jumping the gun then on one of the other recommendations? Does it say specifically what the millage increase is?
Yeah, we need to do them individually, Ms. Gittens.
I understand that. I'm just asking, where is that on one of the other recommendations?
Well, no, because actually by the totals, the millage itself does not increase. The millage itself decreases. So based on this slide that you see here, there's the comparison of last year's millage of a total of 6.147, and then the total millage for this year proposed of 6.058. It is a total decrease in the actual millage rate. So the millage does not increase. It either stays the same or it goes down.
So there's nowhere in this budget that we're asking for an increase in millage?
No, there is not. The millages we are proposing to you today and that you are proposing on are all right here, all three of them, and it turns out to be a total decrease of 0.089, or decrease of about 1.5% of the millage from last year.
So for taxpayers then, in other words, they're decreasing in their millage rates that they have to pay?
The millage rate itself decreases, yes. That may not be the actual result of their tax payment, because the tax roll has increased more than the 1.5% that the millage has decreased. But the millage itself is a decrease from the previous year, yes.
Okay, because you said when the roll goes up, the millage goes down.
Correct.
So on either the rollback or either one, we are not asking for an increase. That's what I'm asking specifically.
An increase in the millage rate itself?
When they
No.
received their tax trim, was there an increase or a request for an increase?
The amount certainly might have been greater than the previous year, the total amount. So I'm not saying the amount that they're paying might go down. All things being equal, it probably wouldn't. It probably would go increase somewhat, as we kind of try to depict on this slide. But the rate itself that is being applied to the tax roll is a smaller rate than what was applied in the previous year.
So it's going down, not up?
The rate, yes.
And what the taxpayers pay, just in general?
I would not say that. I would say that the rate itself is going down. The amount that taxpayers pay, I believe in general, all things being equal, will go up, right? If your taxable value from last year to this year stayed exactly the same,
Right.
which is highly unlikely, okay, but if it did, your amount that you would be paying would be less.
Would be less.
Correct. However, in most people's circumstance, that is not the case. Your tax roll, your taxable value is probably going up.
Yes.
Either by that 3%, that's homestead, or we said on average the taxable value increased 6.3%. So let's assume that your taxable value on your particular home increased 6.3% as well. If that is the case, then the additional total tax that they would see as far as the education or as far as the public school system is concerned would be these numbers that you see here, somewhere between $11 and around $60 based on these taxable values that we have here. And that's just a few examples and illustration.
Okay, so basically then, if because of taxes and all that, if it goes up, we're just asking for a bigger piece of that tax, is that correct?
When you say a bigger piece of that,
a large, I know there was the thing about rollback and all of that, but are we asking if someone owns a house that when they get their trim notices and all that, their taxes may go up? Are we saying that with that, we're asking for a larger portion of that? So that increase is not us saying we want more.
no, well, the increase is a reflection of the increase in the taxable value itself.
Right, okay.
So not necessarily of the rate, because the rate is down. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your
Right.
question, but
The question that people are saying, are we asking for more of their tax money as for education? Are we asking for an increase and therefore their taxes increase? That's the bottom line to it.
okay, so the tax rate itself is a decrease. In effect, given what has happened with the taxable value, quite honestly and quite practically, yes, the amount of tax that they pay this year will probably be more than the amount of tax that they paid last year for schools.
But not because we asked for that to happen.
Correct. It is a function, it's a function of the math, really, right? That even though the rate decreased, the rate didn't decrease at the same or greater percentage than the tax roll itself increased.
Right.
Okay.
And I get that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other discussion, board members? Okay, at this time, please record your vote. Motion on recommendation 1 carries 7-0. Thank you. Dr. Adkins?
Next recommendation, recommended that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2020-2021 final proposed basic discretionary millage of .748 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $69,357,268.
Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve? Mrs. Morgan?
I recommend that we adopt the superintendent's recommendation to adopt a 2021 final proposed discretionary millage at .748 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $69,357,268.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. Is there a second? Ms. Vaughn? Thank you. Any discussion, board members? Okay, at this time, please record your vote. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Dr. Atkins. Next recommendation.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2020-2021 final proposed capital outlay millage of 1.500 with a proposed amount to be raised of $139,085,429. The total millage will equal 6.058 mils with a total amount to be raised of $561,719,687. The total millage to be levied is more than the rollback rate. It is an increase in the rollback rate of 2.39%.
Board members, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Mrs. Vaughn.
I move to accept the superintendent's recommendation that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2020-21 final proposed capital outlay millage of 1.5.
Thank you. And a second, please.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Giovanelli. Any discussion? Hey, board members, at this time, please record your vote. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. And recommendation number 4, Dr. Adkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the final millage rates for the fiscal year 2020-2021.
Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve? Mrs. Morgan?
I move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation to adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the final millage rates for the fiscal year 2020-2021.
Thank you. In a second?
I second.
Mrs. Giovanelli, thank you. Okay, any discussion? Board members, please record your vote. And the motion carries 7-0. Final recommendation, Dr. Atkins.
Yes, so final recommendation, recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the final budget and related resolution adopting the final budget for the 2020-2021 school year as follows. General operating, $964,824,078. Special revenue budget, $157,084,386. Debt service budget, $104,532,235. Capital outlay budget, $543,291,246. Internal service budget, $145,293,901. Total final budget of $1,915,025,846.
Board members, you've heard Dr. Atkins' recommendation. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Vaughn.
I move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation that the Lee County School Board adopt the final budget and related resolution adopting the final budget for the 2020-2021 school year to total $1,915,025,846.
Thank you, Mrs. Vaughn. And a second, please, board members. Ms. Jordan. Any discussion?
I just had one question.
Yes,
I just
Ms.
had one question, please. For the CARES Act, the funding did we use all those funds? Or is that just allocated for this budget going forward?
It's allocated for the budget, and actually, the GEARS Act funding is good through this October. We can do extended learning opportunities through October. The post-secondary and the CTE are in the process of being used, and the ESSER is actually a 2-year grant, and so it's in for a 2-year period.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gittens?
My one question was, we had discussed a while back about increasing the amount in the capital fund so that to give teachers, have more money for teachers to have raises. Is that included in this?
Did you say increasing the amount in capital funds?
There was a discussion at one point about increasing the millage to increase the capital so teachers could have additional funding and all that.
Okay, so I think what you're referring to is because capital funds cannot be used generally for a salary and specifically for teachers, but I think what you're referencing is that there was some discussion about like reducing the capital millage in order to increase, like go to a voted discretionary, so that the net result of that would be 0 to the total millage, but there would be additional funds there for salary. I think that's what you're referring to. Okay, so no, that is not included within this budget based on the discussions that we had throughout the process as to where that would potentially leave us in the budget. So say, for example, our friends to the south of us in Collier did something like that, right? But in terms of their tax roll, which is where, the capital millage is based on, of course, is applied to that in order to generate your funds, just in a different situation than we are, because they have about half the number of students and essentially the same tax roll, which means, or somewhere very close, which means they generate the same capital money that we do for half the amount of students. Right. And their growth rate is nowhere near what ours is. So whereas they were able to reduce their capital millage, still take care of their capital needs, and be able to increase that millage, the Lee County School District is not in that same situation, is not the same for us. And so, no, that is not reflected in the budget that you are being asked to approve now.
Thank you.
Kelly, did you want to add to that? Oh.
Any further discussion, board members? Thank you. Please record your vote.
Okay. Okay.
And motion carries unanimously. We have passed the 2021 final budget.
Okay, and Ms. Fisher, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I did want to add one thing to the question Ms. Gittens was just asking, because Kelly reminded me she might have been referencing something else, in terms of we do have a transfer that at one point we were doing from operating into, or from capital into operating, in order to cover some of those capital type expenditures in the operational fund, which in turn is freeing up more dollars in the operational fund. That is reflected in the capital budget, and it is there in the 5-year capital plan. You will see a line specifically that says that transfer to operating, and so you'll see it reflected there. So that might have been maybe what you were thinking about and referring to, and I did want to clarify that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, it is 6:05, and we have board member, board attorney, and superintendent's comments. Ms. Giovanelli?
I have none.
Ms. Patrica? Ms. Gittens? Ms. Vaughn?
None.
Okay. Attorney Bruno?
None, thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Atkins?
None at this time, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. At this time, seeing no other business to come before this body and seeing no objection, this meeting is adjourned.